Farmers Gone Wild. Woo! Cog and Curtis ran through this latest escapade earlier in the week, but just to bring everyone very quickly up to speed, Labour's budget included a change to inheritance tax rules for farmers that will limit their inheritance tax-free threshold to 1 million. That means the first million is still going to be free. This change is not expected to affect the majority of farmers because the majority of farmers are not that rich. In fact, the official data shows that fewer than 500 farms per year are expected to pay more inheritance tax as a result of the changes from 2026. This has not stopped the very rich farmers from being very upset about this. They've been protesting in London outside Whitehall, and they've been accompanied by the likes of people's heroes Jeremy Clarkson and Nigel Farage. But this couldn't possibly be disingenuous, could it? Well, as Josiah Mortimer reported for the Byline Times recently, it might be. In a 2021 interview with the Times, the Conservative voting controversialist said avoiding inheritance tax was the critical thing in his decision to buy his then £4 million+ farm. It does feel a little bit disingenuous. Now, Femi, I want to bring you in. I know you've been following this closely, and Cog actually gave you a shout out in the last show as the ghost of Brexit past as a reminder. Um, how are you finding it? How are you finding it watching this play out?
So it's one of those issues where I'm not taking a firm position because I'm hearing very, very conflicting things. Like you've got the Treasury saying that this will only affect 500 people because 500 claims, because there are only 500 claims in last year, people that would otherwise have paid inheritance tax, and therefore those are the people who'll be affected by this now. But National Farmers Union are saying that it could affect up to 70,000 farms. So that is a massive difference. And the arguments I'm hearing a lot is along the lines of, well, yes, it'll be 1 million for one spouse, 1 million for the other spouse, and then 1 million for the house and the actual home, and then the land on top of that. So there's a lot of debate as to how many people will actually be caught by this. And if it does include a lot more people, then you're not really targeting your Jeremy Clarksons, you're targeting your everyday farmers. And for me, and this is the argument that I've been having, I don't really care to a large extent about whether or not somebody who has been gifted £3 million equivalent by a parent gets to keep all of it. My main issue is if they don't get to keep all of it, if they have to sell some of it off in order to pay the tax, pay HMRC, that could end up meaning that land then goes to a corporation or a landowner that doesn't plan to use it to farm, and
Mhm.
that could compromise our food security. So it's
Yeah.
not so much about protecting farmers for me as it is about protecting our food industry. Like the whole reason why you have the inheritance tax relief for farmers specifically is because a lot of farms operate at a loss, and so they require subsidies in order to function. And
Mhm.
so if you end up charging them an inheritance tax, which wipes out those subsidies, you'll have a lot of farmers essentially going bust.
Right.
So that's the issue.
How have you kind of been reconciling this? I think did you say you were speaking on it earlier today as well?
Yeah, I had a BBC debate on this earlier today, and so I said essentially, I don't care about the direct effect on farm ownership because for me the issue is in the cost of living crisis. All that really matters to me is how it affects cost of living crisis, i.e., our food supply. Is it going to make food more expensive? Is that going to happen? Now, the thing that really annoys me, as you can imagine, is that the people who have been championing farmers on this issue are the worst people for this issue. Like Jeremy Clarkson is an actual piece of shit. If you remember what he said about Meghan Markle, saying that he wanted her to be paraded through the streets naked with tomatoes thrown at her, shouting "shame, shame, shame." Um, what a guy! And now he
Rat,
has
rat bastard.
yeah,
Sorry.
and then no, it's accurate. um, and now he, having admitted that the reason why he bought that land was to avoid paying inheritance tax, he said that at least this way the government doesn't get the money when I die. He is precisely the sort of person that inheritance tax should be targeted towards. Um, so he's like the worst spokesperson you can imagine to argue against this. And then you've got people like Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage said that if we left the EU, it would mean that we'd have increase our farm production here in the UK.
Great British
Um,
Farms, blah blah blah
e-
blah.
exactly. Boris Johnson said that we'd increase the subsidies and the payments for farmers, that it would avoid paperwork, avoid red tape. And now, as you may have seen in the most recent video, I've interviewed farmers that said that Brexit has created tons more red tape for them. So the
Yeah,
people who have already been on record as spending the last 8 years screwing the farming industry are now supposedly its greatest champions.
no,
So that for me is insane.
no. I mean, it. Yeah, don't forget also James Dyson is apparently very upset about the budget and the inheritance tax reforms. I think he called it spiteful in the Times. Um, James Dyson is one of the Brexit billionaires who also owns over 35,000 acres of land, farmland. And again, he thinks it's very unfair.
Given that right now, according to Farmers Weekly, they did a survey, 69% of farmers believe that Brexit has either fairly or very much negatively affected their farms.
Yeah.
The National Farmers Union has said that Brexit has created a crisis in UK farming. The Food and Drink Association said Brexit, by just in the first few months, wipes 2 billion off the UK food industry.
Hmm.
So the idea that the people who supported Brexit um, can have a word on what's good for the farming industry is insane to me.
No, and yeah, and it's also, I mean, there's the other side of this as well. Like, I think one of the things that's interesting with this is the pitching it of like Nigel Farage put wellies on to go and protest, to be like, look at me, I'm a working farmer, and like they're trying to play on this like old school image of like the farmer going around with his flat cap and like milking the
Mm-hmm.
cows himself, and like we're talking about farmers who have more than a million, who are getting like who have huge amounts of assets, and we're also talking about farmers who are pretty have a pretty tough reputation in terms of like exploiting a lot of their workers, especially when it comes like migrant workers, pre-Brexit as well. A lot of There's not a lot of regulation on farm workers, to the point where a lot of people who've come to the UK to work on these farms have been heavily exploited, and they're basically at the behest of these employers who are famously not treating them particularly well. So it's very, very uncomfortable to have this sort of like cosplay situation where they're going around like bringing the tractors into town. It's probably the first time that guy's been on a tractor in years. I don't know. It's so farcical to see this kind of playing out with this kind of imagery.
And I've also got a couple of issues with Farage, for example. There has like I don't like using the word stupid in politics. I try to avoid it at all, well, not at
Me
all costs.
neither.
Um,
I would never.
but if you followed Nigel Farage um, on farming when it came to Brexit, if you followed him on fishermen, especially on fishing when it came to Brexit, like you've seen what he did to the fishing industry. You've seen him on record as saying that Brexit would give the farming and would give UK fishing £2 billion, and instead its cost, according to the National Federation of Fishermen's Associations, £300 million.
Mm.
Like you've seen him decimate a UK industry, and you think he should be the leader of yours. If it is stupidity.
But do you think he? But did he dress as a fisherman?
He actually did.
Oh, did
He,
he? Oh shit! Of course he fucking did.
he got on a boat. He got on a boat. He caught some fish. There's a big photo of him holding a fish. It was
Oh god. Well, then there's no excuse. There's no excuse to trust him this time. I thought maybe that might have been what swung it.
mm,
No, it's infuriating.
I also like, and I try not to say this too often because I know that we should try and find some. We shouldn't be rubbing people's mistakes in their faces, but given that farming has been screwed by Brexit, given that 54% of farmers did
Mhm.
vote for Brexit, like I don't I try not to I don't hate people who voted for Brexit. I don't. It's just what you did afterwards. When you
Yeah.
saw the wheels fall off in the 3 years that followed, while Boris Johnson was just everything was going to hell, and in the years since where Brexit has been damaging,
Mhm.
if these farmers had come out and protested loudly whilst everybody else was, we wouldn't. Not only wouldn't we would we not have had the direct damage to farming, we also wouldn't have done so much damage to the economy that, according to the official figures, has wiped 40 billion off UK tax revenue. The government probably wouldn't be going so far in order to claw back taxes in the first place.
Do you think, actually, in terms of those demographics of the farmers that did vote Brexit, do you think it's the same farmers that aren't in this bracket? Because I don't know. Like, I know there was a split. You'll know. If only someone who I was talking to would know something about Brexit demographics and voting. Hey, Femi, do you know if there was like a difference in household income between farmers that voted for and against?
I was tempted to look that up today. I just didn't get around to it.
Oh God.
But yeah, sorry. But generally speaking, it will be the older you are, the more likely you are to vote Leave, and I would imagine also that the more landed gentry farmers would
Mm.
be also more likely to vote Leave. So they're the ones most likely to be affected by policies like this.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.